Well, thank you everyone for attending this inaugural technical webinar that we're doing for Galantas. We thought this would be a great opportunity for current shareholders and potential shareholders to really listen in on why we think we may have a world-class district in Northern Ireland. And joining us on this call are two great geologists, Sarah Coulter, who works for Galantas. She's our chief geologist. She's a PhD, has worked at this project for a number of years. And I think Sarah has done a tremendous job in really trying to show the market that what we had in the past in our 2014 resource is just the beginning of what we think we can grow. And obviously, for those of you that have been following Galantas, have seen the number of holes that Sarah has been able to drill, some high grade wide zones, as well as the identification of these dilation zones, which we'll get through and discuss a little bit more detail in this presentation. And also joining us on this call is Mr. Arthurs. Again, for those of you that have been following Galantas, Mr. Arthurs is a special advisor to Galantas, and having the ability and the opportunity for John to really present why he thinks the regional potential in this area is significant, including I'll try and use this lightly, but we do think we have potential here for a world-class district, and drilling is really going to demonstrate. It's still early days, but Galantas controls over 550 square kilometers of ground, and we think we've picked up some of the best ground in Northern Ireland. So I'll pass it on now to Sarah and John to go through the slides. We'll open up the presentation to questions at the end. Keep in mind, this will be a technical presentation, but towards the end, feel free to ask any questions, and we'll try and address any of the questions you may have on the potential here. So John, if you want to start.
Thank you very much, Mario. Well, I suppose most people have tuned in to find out more about the ideas that guide Galantas's exploration. I know that some of you are investors, while others are geologists, and some perhaps both. Like all of you, I get a buzz out of exploration ideas. And in the next 10 minutes, I plan to give at least an outline of what the newer exploration ideas are. I'll then hand over to Sarah Coulter, who will talk about interesting new details that she has discovered in the mine. First, a bit of background. I've been invited to speak to you today because I have a long history in Tyrone. Some would say too long. 50 years ago, as a young geological survey officer, I was given a wonderful job of surveying what was then poorly known geology and geochemistry of Tyrone and Derry/Londonderry, the Dalradian rocks in that area. In those days, there was no thought of gold deposits in Ireland, but in fact, the evidence was staring us in the face, the rich collections of gold artifacts in Irish museums. That all changed in the 1980s when, informed at least partly by our regional survey work, NX International discovered the Carignault deposit. NX was successful because John Clifford, who I think is with us today, and the late René Steiger not only had the talent but the personal experience of Canadian gold mines to make the creative leap to Tyrone, something that none of the rest of us had. In fact, we now know that gold in Ireland is widespread in rocks older than 420 million years. The Dalradian schists of northwest Ireland are the hosts to the gold. Veins that were originally deposited in sands and silts, schists that is, and they extend from Tyrone and Donegal up in the northwest here to Western Ireland, where the old country people talk about the next parish, that is Canada and USA. It turns out that this connection goes even deeper than our close kinship ties. Academic researchers in the 1970s and 80s showed how the fragments of older geology and Newfoundland fit together. In fact, they are sections of the same tectonic collision zone, the Caledonian Appalachian Orogenic Belt. It extends from northern Norway through Greenland, Scotland, and Ireland to Newfoundland and on down through the Appalachians as far as the Carolinas. The belt is made up of fragments of ancient crust annealed together along crustal scale faults. And in Tyrone, as elsewhere, these faults provided pathways for hot mineralizing fluids to deposit gold in deep fractures. We know that gold occurrences in Tyrone lie close to the Omagh Fault, which is a major break that extends in one direction through to Scotland, the Highland Boundary Fault, and in the other direction to the Bay Vert-Brompton line in Newfoundland. Incidentally, the distance along the Omagh Fault in this map is about 50 kilometers. That distance is comparable to the Larder Lake Cadillac Fault between Malartic and Louvecourt in Val d'Or in Canada, which plays the same role there. Obviously, the age is different in Tyrone, and perhaps too the endowment may be much poorer here. But the point is that we just don't know. There's very little outcrop in Tyrone, and 50 years old, it is still only at the earliest stage of exploration. Now, in early 1980, the Lac Inlier was licensed by Rio Phoenix North, a subsidiary of Rio Tinto. This ground is now held by Galantas and still is the only company to have successfully operated a mine so far, that is at Cavanagh. Using good old-fashioned prospecting, the Rio Phoenix crew, led by Dave Cliff and Mark Wolfenden, discovered a thin, broken, gold-rich quartz vein outcropping in a small stream, which you can see in the upper right photo here. It was traced north by trenching, where they found the rich Kearney Vein, which is wider, more coherent, and mineable. Now, nothing of what I've said so far will be news to you, those of you who are experienced in the geology of Tyrone. But only in the last 2 years have we recognized a subtle but significant point about the host rocks. The Kearney Vein is hosted by thick and harder beds of metamorphosed sandstone, technically a metagraywacke, in contrast to the very soft graphitic schists where the Rio Phoenix Discovery Vein was found. The difference is that the thicker and mineable veins can be created by brittle fracturing in the metagraywackes, whereas the veins in the soft graphitic schist are disrupted by ductile shearing. This difference in rheology gives a clue about where else to explore. So in a plan view of the mine area, we can see the Kearney Vein in the middle here, the blue line, and all the other blue lines. The orange shape around the Kearney Vein is the projected plan view of the ore block model. The important point for assessment of future potential is that the Kearney Vein is only one vein within a set of parallel veins, all steeply dipping and striking roughly north-south. They all lie within this metagraywacke member, which we're calling the Cavanagh member, as metagraywacke layer here. The strike extent of the workable sections of the vein seems to be constrained between a prominent magnetic low, which we're not quite sure what it is. I think it is a pelitic schist, and the basal thrust, which can be seen in drill core at the base of the Kearney Vein. Clearly, if the metagraywacke is a favorable horizon for vein development, we need to trace it along strike to the east and west, as well as down dip to the north. And that presented us initially with a challenge. Regionally, we know that the Cavanagh veins lie within the Lac Inlier, an uplifted block of Dalradian schist surrounded by unmineralized younger rocks. Mapping and sampling of the rocks of the whole area in detail would have been very time-consuming and largely unproductive. Fortunately, we had a great workaround. The Geological Survey of Northern Ireland have a wonderful collection of manuscript field map survey sheets created in the period from the 1900s through to 1990. These maps show exactly where all the outcrops are and something about the outcrops and some structural measurements. In addition, the Geological Survey have also flown the wonderful TELUS project, which has given us high-resolution airborne magnetic and EM surveys of the whole country. We've acquired the data for round about the Galantas license areas and commissioned Graham Reid of BRG Consultants to reprocess the data for us, which brings out the fine detail of many of the structures. So putting both of these two data sources together, along with a little bit of field checking, we now have a new map, a new interpretation of the geology of the Lac Inlier, which you see here. And all those measurements there, or the majority of them, are the original Geological Survey measurements. And we have managed to trace the prospective unit east and west right across the Lac Inlier. So going right into Kavanagh and taking a section across it, you can see the Kavanagh member dips north, and so that gives us more prospective ground at depth beneath the Kearney Vein to the north. Now, shortly, I'm just going to hand over to Sarah Coulter. Before I do, I'd like to go off piste for a moment. At this stage of my career, I'm very happy to be an advisor to Galantas, but I'm an occasional contributor. I'm very happy to be so. Now, Rick Rule, former CEO of Sprott Holdings, said, and I quote, "Exploration is not an asset-intensive business. It is a human capital business, a research and development business, like software, like biotech. Before you look at the project, look at the people." Galantas did a great job in the past with very little money. Now, however, it's undergone a sea change. Mario, Alan, and Brendan have brought in their international experience and expertise in mine finance and engineering. Sarah and her team of enthusiastic young geologists have been enabled to make great strides recently. In particular, the new understanding of vein dilation zones is entirely down to them. So now I'd like to hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And just looking again at this cross-section that John has highlighted, you can see the Kavanagh member, which is our favoured host rock, dipping north and shown there in the green. And just at the top of this area, you can see the current Galantas resource highlighted in yellow. So we expect that the veins at Kavanagh and elsewhere along strike within the Kavanagh member will be well developed to the north at depth. Now that's the bigger picture. We're going to spend just a few minutes looking in more detail at the resource area itself. So here you can see a long section of the Kearney Vein. The Kearney Vein is the most continuous vein that we have identified on the site so far, striking over 800 meters. And you can see the resource model there shows the inferred category in red, the indicated in green, and the measured resource in blue. And we have put up a few of our key vein intersections there and highlighted those. Those that are shown in yellow are derived from the current drill program. And when we were beginning the underground development, we had an ideal opportunity to get in and create some really detailed geological maps along the strike of the veins. And what the geology team was able to identify is that along the strike, we have a pattern of vein swelling and grade increases. And we've called these dilation zones. And these dilation zones can be linked between the first 5 levels of the underground development. And these can be linked on north dipping planes. So we went into the current drill program with one of our aims being to test whether these dilation zones could be projected at depth and if we could pick them up at regular intervals along strike. And our drill data so far is supporting that theory. You can see on the image there, I've highlighted 2 yellow arrows, and these are potential dilation zones. And within those areas, we have intersections of, for example, 31.7 grams per tonne gold over 7 meters, and 23.8 grams per tonne gold over 2.9 meters. Now, that's not to say that we don't find variability within these dilation zones, but the important point here is that we now are able to predict the vein swelling with a bit more accuracy. So these pinch swell structures have become more predictable. Looking now at the resource model for the Joshua Vein. The Joshua Vein sits 400 meters to the west of Kearney. There's been less drilling done in this area, but that aside, we have been able to identify 3 potential dilation zones. These are shown with the arrows on the image. And again, the drill data from our latest program is shown in yellow. So we have in the shallow zone there, 2.7 meter intersection at 7.7 grams per tonne. And a little deeper, 13.1 meter intersection at 17.4 grams per tonne. And then in that central dilation area, we have 6.5 meters at 10.1 grams per tonne gold. And actually, if you look down dip of that central dilation area, we hit our hole which has the highest gold accumulation that's been identified so far for the site, and that's hole 155. And the intersection there was 21.6 meters at 9.9 grams per tonne gold. So we believe that the veins will continue to be well developed at depth and to the north. So we expect to be able to project these dilation zones down further. Incidentally, the drill hole there, hole 155, and others fall out with the current resource because our last resource statement was published in 2014. So we still have to update and incorporate drilled data from 2015, 2016, and the latest drill program. This slide shows you a summary of our drill data within the current program. To date, we have drilled 3,155 meters. And in the left-hand column there, you can see the hole ID. The third column gives you the intersect measurement, the downhole measurement, and then the estimated tree width next to that. And the distance from the ground surface to the top of the intersection is in the next column. And then we have results for gold, silver, and lead shown. And as I said before, one of the aims of our current program is to test the dilation zone theory. But also we want to upgrade the inferred resource and fill in gaps within the resource model too. And within the program, we have identified the second and fourth highest gold accumulation areas to date, with the second highest being identified in hole 175, which is the 7th row down, and that gave us an estimated true width of 6.9 meters at 17.4 grams per tonne gold. And that was on the Joshua Vein. On the Kearney Vein, we had an intersection of 3.3 meters tree width at 31.7 grams per tonne gold, and that was in hole 181. So I want to look a little bit further afield now and you can see in this plan view the main veins marked in blue, the Kearney Vein in the east, the Joshua Vein 400 meters to the west of that, and the Kerr veins, which sit between those two main veins. What I want to highlight here are two near-site targets, one to the east over the Elkins Vein and another one to the west over an area called Pigeon Top. To the east, the Elkins Vein has been drilled over 250 meters along strike, but there hasn't been any recent drilling, and there hasn't been any exploration in this area since 2007. To the west, the Pigeon Top area hasn't been drilled at all, and some early deep overburden sampling, which was carried out by Rio Phoenix in the 1980s, revealed a cluster of gold anomalies grading up to 13.5 grams per tonne gold. So back in September, BRG carried out a gradient array IP survey over both of these targets. And the results of this were very interesting. We have got a very clear resistivity high anomaly, which trends north-south over both the Elkins Vein and the Pigeon Top target. And we expect that these are tied in with fault structures which trend north-south. And that's exactly what we would be looking for in the search for new veins. Also, just to the east of the Elkins and just within the survey area, you can see another approximately north-south trend of resistivity high anomalies, which correspond with some historic geochemical anomalies. So this is another area that we would like to explore, and as yet hasn't been the focus of any exploration activity. So we're just going to zoom out a bit further, and in this shot you can see a simplified geology map for the whole of the Lac Inlier, and you can see the host rock that we're most interested in, the Kavanagh Core member, extends right from the west right through the Lac Inlier to the east, and in the east obviously is where we have the cluster of the main veins with Kearney and Joshua marked there. Our target Elkins is also shown, and about 2 kilometers to the west of that is where Pigeon Top lies. And then west of Pigeon Top we have at least 10 kilometers of that Kavanagh Core member, which lies in an area that is underexplored. There have been some historic surveys done, and Galantas has carried out soil surveys and some mapping projects as well in the west, but it has never received the same amount of attention as the eastern portion of the Inlier. Now, interestingly, within that Kavanagh Core member and in the areas marked at Cornavarro and Greenan, we do have a cluster of base metal and gold and silver anomalies in soils and float rocks and stream sediments. So these are two high priority targets that lie out with the mine site that we would like to explore further also. And I'm just going to finish with this slide, which shows our largest license area, OM4, which is 250 square kilometers. And it, as you can see, lies just to the northwest of the Lac Inlier. And cutting through this license area are two regional northeast trending faults. There are also Dalradian lithologies within this area, and some gold in soil anomalies which were picked up by the TELUS project, and those are shown as the red dots there. Galantas has carried out a number of soil surveys, particularly in and around the Loch Foyle fault, and we have got some good anomalies, and we will be following that up with some deep overburden sampling imminently. So I just want to conclude by saying that the observations that we have made in the underground have given us a greater understanding of how the veins vary along strike with depth. And this has given us a better chance now of targeting wider and higher grade areas within the mine plan. And then the definition of the ideal host rock, the Kavanagh core member, informs our exploration strategy and gives us a greater confidence that further veins are likely to be uncovered in the underexplored areas of the Lac Inlier. Thank you, and I'll hand back over to Mario.
Perfect. I'm assuming everyone can hear me now. We just had a slight technical difficulty, but we got some good Q&A coming through. So I'll go through some of the questions with you, Sarah and John. And one of the questions was, how deep is the basal rock in this area?
Say that again, please.
How deep is the basal rock in this area? So that the Kavanagh member unit, I'm assuming
the basal thrust, I think, is maybe what you meant, and it is to the south. If I can go back over the slides, I don't know if that's possible. Let me see. Can we do that? No? Oh, maybe not. Okay. Well, to the south of the Kearney and Kearney and Joshua veins, we have mapped the outcrop of the thrust. You can't actually see it. It's under soil cover, but you can see it at depth. So it is a shallow dipping structure at about 20 degrees. So it varies from actually at surface all the way down to whatever the deepest level we've drilled to is, Sarah. What's that?
Over 300 meters.
Over 300 meters. But it should continue on down and become deeper and deeper. And then I hope that the veins will continue down plunge along the dilation zones that Sarah and her team have identified. So it will get deeper and deeper down plunge.
Good. And another follow-up question to what you were just saying, John, is, and this is for you, Sarah, are we expecting wider fractures at depth, and the fractures is really what's leading to these dilation zones?
To depth, to the north is we have equal potential really to get wide zones, yes. So long as we're within that harder host rock, which fractures, then we will expect to see wider zones of mineralization.
Okay, good. Another question that came through is the 2014 resource. We've done quite a bit of drilling since then. How do we think this drilling will impact our historical resource?
Yes, so obviously it's been a number of years since we've updated it. So in that time we have had 2 drilling programs. So we've got a substantial amount of data to add to that. A number of holes that have penetrated the inferred resource. So we expect that will be a large proportion of that will be upgraded. And also filled in areas, gaps in the resource. But as well as that, we have now obviously this better understanding of the dilation zones. That will be remodeled into the new resource. So that should make a big difference to the resource, and we're quite optimistic that we will see a good increase.
Okay. And another question. When we look at the Joshua and Kearney vein, which are the key targets and priority in the short term, what are some of the other targets in and around this area, whether it's on strike or to depth?
So within the mine site itself, we also have the Kerr veins, which I didn't talk about there, but they actually sit between the Kearney and the Joshua. So about 200 meters west of the Kearney vein is where we see the Kerr veins, and they have been mapped and channel sampled to the south, but we haven't as yet explored them along strike to the north significantly. So what we expect to find is that as we mine from the Kearney towards the Joshua, that we may pick up the Kerr structure in between. And certainly we have a good deep overburden anomaly cluster in that area. So we've got good potential to pick up those veins, and that is within the mine site itself. Obviously, over to the east, we've got then Elkins, but between Elkins and Kearney, we have another vein known as Sammy's vein. And again, that there has been some small amount of drilling done historically, but nothing recent. And then to the west of the Joshua vein, 70 meters west of Joshua, we have the Kestrel vein, and that vein was only identified in the last drilling program in 2015. So again, that hasn't been incorporated into the current published resource. We'd hope to try to trace that further north and south.
Thanks, Sarah. And just to summarize from my perspective, when you look at the Joshua and the Kearney vein and some of the intercepts we've been able to hit, the B lens, the C lens, that are near the Kearney vein. So as we continue to drill or develop between the Joshua and the Kearney vein, this should not come as a surprise to anyone that there is potential for additional veins. When you looked at the Dalradian, when they came up with their 6 million ounces at 13 grams, I believe they had around 26, 29 veins identified. We heard the ounces are obviously greater now since 2018 because they continued to drill. At our project, I think we've identified 16 veins to date, but really Joshua and Kearney are really the only 2 veins that we've drilled with any significant amount of meters, and in total we probably drilled 25,000 meters in this area. So the ability to find more of these veins, I think, is going to bode well to really increase our resources here. And then in terms of, I guess this is more of a corporate question, the priority of the company from a financing perspective, where we're going to put our effort. And as I've been trying to say many times, Galantas is quite unique in that we have the unique ability now to really demonstrate that we have potential for a world-class district, and the focus in the short term will obviously be the Joshua and the Kearney vein, and getting the assets into production and generating the cash flow from that production will then be reinvested back into the ground to continue to drill and expand the resources. So, when you look at newfound gold, which I'm sure many people on this call would have seen, that Eric Sprott thinks it may be one of the biggest discoveries in Canada. I think Eric now has around 36% of newfound gold. But this structure that we're seeing, and John alluded to that early in the presentation, it's these major faults that run from Newfoundland into the island of Ireland to Scotland. These are major fault structures, and we've got 550 square kilometers, and we're the only company with Dalradian that really controls what we would consider the most prospective ground. So the ability for Galantas to generate the cash flow to demonstrate the exploration potential is going to be quite unique, because if we can generate this cash flow, we're not going to be diluting our existing shareholders to try and show that potential that we have in this area. So anyone who's looking to invest in Galantas, I think, is going to get exposure to production, but at the same time exposure to potentially a world-class district. And I think that's going to be quite unique for Galantas.
Sarah, there's another question around the gold accumulation, and really, I think what they're trying to say is maybe we can chat a little bit about some of the consistency in the gold that we're seeing. I think I mentioned it on one of the presentations. We don't get VG here, so we do have a little bit more continuity in our drill holes.
Yeah, that's right. So the gold is hosted in the sulfides, and within the vein itself, you get some variability in the grade across the vein, but it's as Mario said, we're not getting nuggets there, so we can analyze the veins and get a good sense of grade continuity. We did a lot of channel sampling in the early stages of the Joshua vein exploration, and traced the continuity of the grade and the width of the vein as well along strike. And of course, there's variability, and these are pinch and swell structures, but we're getting good grades, and we know exactly where to look. We have within the vein usually a quartz breccia, and very often clay associated with that at one or both margins as well. And the clay does contain a reasonable grade of gold too.
Yeah, and pinching and swelling in orogenic gold deposits, Sarah, is pretty common, but the ability to potentially predict where these veins swell, I think, is quite unique. And you and our team have done a great job in really trying to predict where the dilation zones may be occurring. So I'm not sure if listeners on this call really picked up on that, but pinching and swelling is very common. What Sarah has been able to do now with a number of holes is predict where these swelling areas may occur, and where we get the dilation zones, we seem to be getting obviously wider zones and potentially higher grades than we would have drilled in the past.
Yes, that's right. If this had just been based on drill data alone, we wouldn't have been able to understand that pinch and swell nature to the degree that we now do. It has been a case of being underground in the development. Our mine geologist, Zoe Brown, has done an excellent job of doing some very detailed mapping along the veins and picking up these patterns.
That's great, Sarah. And then another question was, how do we prioritize, again, exploration targets? And maybe you can sort of comment on this, John and Sarah, around some of the regional exploration that we have. So our focus, as I mentioned, is near the mine site, Joshua and Kearney. But as we continue to advance this, we are going to look for additional targets. And we do have a very prospective land package. And as you look further west beyond Pigeon Top, Sarah, my recollection is we've seen other gold targets as well as base metal targets, copper, zinc, that we just never had the time or the money in the past to really explore. But as we grow, those targets in time will become tested. Maybe you can comment a little bit about the regional potential here, Sarah, and then John as well.
Yeah. Okay. So on that second last slide, I think it was. Let's see if I can move towards that. So we have the Cabinet Corps member shown there in green, and you can see that there are, to the west of Pigeon Top, there's two prime targets there, which we've highlighted as Cornavarro and Greenan. They sit within the prospective unit, and there are geochemical anomalies associated with those two areas. And for example, in Cornavarro, we have clustered copper anomalies up to 2,290 ppm, clustered lead over 18,000 ppm, and zinc at over 3,000 ppm in float rocks. And then Greenan, also we have clustered zinc anomalies over 450 ppm in float.
And we haven't drill tested any of these targets, Sarah?
No, we haven't been drilling in the west of the Lac at all. So it's only low-level exploration that has taken place in these areas so far.
And John, geologically, we see any reason why we can't find base metal deposits in addition to some gold deposits in this on this trend? Or maybe the other way, do you see the potential for base metal deposits here as well?
I wouldn't put it as a high priority. I think what happens is we're getting base metal credits in the veins, particularly lead and copper, and that should add to the concentrate value very substantially. But I think one of the points is that gold is nuggety and hard to find. However, the base metals are more widely dispersed geochemically. So where we find base metal anomalies, there's actually a good chance of finding gold anomalies when we look a bit closer. So, in fact, they're very encouraging. No, I'm really encouraged by the induced potential surveys and the gradient arrays. I think those test surveys that Sarah's done on either side of the mine site at Pigeon Top and Elkins are really terrific. And I'd love to see the company doing a lot more IP gradient array surveys, which should give us direct drilling targets.
Okay, thank you, John. And we got another question from an investor just asking us to summarize a little bit about the geology and some of the targets, and hopefully maybe I can help summarize it again. And Sarah and John, feel free to add any comments. So basically, the way I look at this, and the reason why we got involved and we were able to raise $8 million back in May, it was some very noteworthy investors. So Eric Sprott took one of the largest positions in that $8 million financing. Mike Gentile, who's very well known as well, took a very significant position, as well as a number of high net worth individuals. And the reason for that is, I believe, that the potential of Galantas sort of fell through the cracks. And the reason that happened is Galantas focused on production. It produced about 30,000 ounces from an open pit, and the plan was then to go underground. And we have all the infrastructure in place to process the ore, obviously, because it did produce 30,000 ounces. But when the company was tight on cash, it didn't have the capital to go into production, nor did it have the capital to explore. And I believe the European market prefers operating companies, and the North American market obviously loves operating companies, but they also really value exploration companies. And Galantas wasn't able to deliver because of tight capital and other reasons on providing the excitement that the Canadian market or the European market would like. But today, when we raised $8 million, we committed to our shareholders that we are going to do a dual strategy now, which is production and exploration. And those drill holes that we've been drilling, whether it's at Joshua or Kearney, at Joshua, the 13 meters of 17 grams, and the Kearney of the 7 meters of 32 gram type range. Sarah and the team have done a great job on that. And really what we're trying to show here, near the mine site, the Joshua and the Kearney vein are open down plunge, and the deepest hole, I guess, at Kearney would be around that 300 meter range, and let's say Joshua's 200 meters. So there's still a lot of potential on these additional veins to find gold at depth. But in addition to that, as Sarah mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a number of veins in between these two veins, the B lens, the C lens, for example, as well as some additional veins like the Kerr vein that we haven't yet really drill tested. And as we move further east and further west, there are a number of veins that have some good gold grades. We have some really small resources on a number of those veins, but the reason why the resources are small is because the lack of capital to drill test these targets. So from an investor perspective, if you value high-grade gold, which we're clearly showing now that Galantas is potentially a high-grade deposit, while at the same time valuing production, so you get the optionality of a growing deposit while at the same time producing gold so you can reinvest in the ground. I think Galantas is an interesting investment that potential investors should have a look at, and current shareholders should have a look at. And none of this should be surprising to anyone. because again, if you look at Dalradian when they were purchased in 2018 at around 550 million Canadian, at the time they had about 6 million ounces at 13 grams. We're about 20 kilometers away. So this is a major emerging district, and I'm not going to get into the details why it hasn't been explored more aggressively like you would have seen in other parts of the world where you have a Dalradian with a world-class asset already established. But I think now Galantas is at the beginning stages to really start to demonstrate that we do have great potential here. And again, when you look at Newfoundland and the structures and the high-grade gold you're seeing at the Queensway project, and when Newfoundland and Queensway went public, they did use Dalradian as their model of why they thought there was great potential there. And Galantas sort of again got forgotten, but hopefully not any longer as we continue to drill and deliver the results that we expect we're going to deliver here. I think this is a project that the market's going to appreciate. So hopefully that sort of summarizes why we're quite excited about this project. So just in conclusion, Sarah, John, I really appreciate your time and effort here. This was the first time we tried something like this because we're getting a lot of questions from investors when I go to conferences or presentations on the geology. And those who know me, I do have a finance background, but I thought this would be quite useful to actually hear from John and Sarah directly on why they thought we have a significant district here with great potential. And for investors, continue to watch Galantas. We've got a lot of catalysts in front of us. And as we continue to deliver, I think the market's really going to pay close attention to us. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Sarah or Kimberly Lynn or any of our team here. And we're always happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you.